Big Ten Championship scenarios right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. Please like the video and subscribe. There are 4 weekends left in the college football season. The Saturdays of November 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th. There are teams in the Big Ten that will play all 4 weekends. There are other teams that only play 3 of the 4 because they still have 1 of the 2 byes left. Therefore, everybody in the Big Ten has either played 5 conference games to date or 6. All right, let's run down the Big Ten standings and size up the scenarios. Oregon and Indiana both 6-0. Ohio State and Penn State at 4-1. And there are teams with 2 losses. Could they possibly play their way into the Big Ten championship game? I don't know. And I'm not going to answer that question. The reason why is because it's so ridiculous, it's not going to happen. And if it is in the process of happening, we've got 3 more weeks to determine that. And so if things start to fall apart for the likes of Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana, and Penn State, we will look at those scenarios starting, let's say, next week when the wheels start to come off. But for right now, there is no reason to look at a 2-loss team in the Big Ten. If Oregon and Indiana win out, they will be the 2 undefeated teams, obviously at 9-0, and they will play in the Big Ten championship game. Another likely scenario is Oregon and Ohio State both win out. Well, who would go to the Big Ten championship game to take on the Ducks because the Buckeyes would be tied with Penn State and Indiana? Well, simply the Buckeyes would go because they defeated both Penn State and Indiana under this situation. So again, this is the 3rd most likely scenario that does not have a clear-cut winner or participant to play Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. This is with Ohio State defeating Penn State, which already happened, and Indiana, but losing to Michigan. Therefore, we've got a 2-way tie at 8-1 between Indiana and Penn State. Who would go to play Oregon in Indianapolis? The first tiebreaker is head-to-head. Obviously, we need to move on. The next tiebreaker is common opponents, and the record for both Indiana and Penn State against like opponents in the Big Ten. Both the Hoosiers and the Nittany Lions have faced UCLA, Ohio State, Washington, Purdue, and Maryland 5 games, and since they both lost to Ohio State and lost no other games, they both would go 4-1 against common opponents in the Big Ten. The next tiebreaker I don't necessarily agree with being out of order. I think this should be further down the list, but regardless, you go by the seedings within the conference to find who has the best win or at what point has one of the 2 teams lost to a common opponent. Well, the situation here is, again, both Indiana and Penn State in this scenario would have lost to Ohio State. Therefore, this is another tiebreaker in which the 2 teams would be tied. So we go to tiebreaker number 4. Opponents' win percentage in the Big Ten. As it stands right now, the opponent winning percentage for Indiana is 19-32. The opponent's record for Penn State, 22-30. So Penn State currently has a 2.5 game lead over Indiana in opponent's win percentage. So if we project this out and look at the rest of the schedule and then the teams that Penn State and Indiana have already played to project how well they're going to do, this is my personal projection that Indiana's opponents in the Big Ten will be 30-42 and Penn State's 36-36. Therefore, under that scenario, Penn State would move on to the Big Ten championship game. Now let's bring Oregon into play. The Ducks are number 1 in the country. They look infallible, but they're not. 9-0, 6-0 in the Big Ten. They got 3 games left. Maryland at home, at Wisconsin, and then Washington at Autzen Stadium as well. Okay, if Oregon ties Ohio State, they go to the Big Ten championship game based on a head-to-head. However, the Ducks did not play Penn State or Indiana. How do they measure up against those 2 teams? If Oregon, Indiana, and Penn State all tie, then they have surprisingly 5 common opponents between 3 teams: UCLA, Ohio State, Purdue, Maryland, and Washington. If Oregon should lose to Wisconsin, then they would be 5-0 against those 5 teams. Therefore, they would get the nod over Indiana and Penn State, who are 4-1 with the loss to Ohio State. But if Oregon loses to either Maryland or Washington, and then The Ducks, the Hoosiers, and the Nittany Lions are all 4-1 and still tied. So you got to move down to the next tiebreaker, where Oregon gets the nod over Penn State and Indiana based on the highest seeded win over Ohio State. And then just to check out opponents' winning percentage, even though I don't see this coming into play, Oregon's current schedule is 21-30. We projected to be 31-41. There you see it against Indiana's current opponent's winning percentage and also Penn State. So most, including myself, believe that Oregon, Ohio State are lined up to go to the Big Ten championship game, expecting the Buckeyes to run the table. If Ohio State slips up against Indiana, that gives Penn State the inside track, having played a better Big Ten record to date and projected for the rest of the season. If Penn State slips up, obviously Indiana's got that matchup against Ohio State to finish with the best record outside of Oregon in the Big Ten. So that's how it stands right now. Leave your comments and questions down below right here at the Voice of College Football.